I'm an absolutely huge fan of your work and spend most of my time, despite the fact that I work in portraits and I work photographing people, absolutely confused at the level of skill that you have in terms of retouch and lighting and so on. But before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of things, just how did you end up gravitating towards photography?
Well, that's really kind, Kris. It's an interesting one, really. It was about 16 years ago now. I think I always used to do a little bit as a kid, but nothing major. It was things like, Kodak with a flash on top, one of those flash cube things that used to burn out after you use them. So that was my first introduction to photography. I've never done any darkroom stuff at all. So 16 years ago, I started out properly, and that was my first digital camera, I guess. And it was because a friend of mine who's a hairdresser, I think I must have just bought a camera for some reason, but I didn't realise at the time that I was going to start getting into it. He asked me if I'd take some photographs for him to enter a competition. So he was entering a men's hairdressing competition in Paris, and he said, could I photograph some of the work he'd done with some of his clients? So I agreed, and then from that point went off to a friend who had a light, got a light off of him, a strobe, and took it into the salon. He did the hair of the client, and I took some photographs, and we were lucky enough to get through to the competition finals, which meant we had to go to Paris to do it. So
Wow.
My friend said to me, would you like to come along? And I said, yeah, because I've never been to Paris before. And I'd have had an amazing time. Basically, this show that they had there was hair show. It's called the Mondial Coiffeur de Beauty. It was in a massive convention centre, and they had live catwalks and stuff, and you could go right up to the front and take photographs. So I made an opportunity to try that, because I'd never done that before. And I found that such a buzz, being on a catwalk photographer was just really cool. So from that point, I'd got hooked. And to be honest with you, since then, I've never stopped really loving photographing people. So I would consider myself a kind of a portrait photographer foremost, specialising, I guess, in hair and beauty.
Yeah. No, it's like I say, coming from the point of view of someone that's obviously substantially less gifted when it comes to the retouch side of things, and obviously your dearth of knowledge of lighting as well, is fairly intimidating, I'd say, from my point of view. One of the things I find most fascinating is how people end up gravitating towards beauty work, given that it's quite labor intensive and quite team reliant. So was it just that initial shoot that kind of pushed you towards beauty and you didn't look back, or was there an underlying obsession with anything else that kind of pushed you in that direction?
Yeah, it probably was that initial one that did it, and especially after photographing the catwalk as well. I just found that was really something I enjoyed. So I'm going to disappoint you on the retouching front, because although I do retouching of my images in certain styles, when it comes to the real close-up beauty work, I actually employ a retoucher.
Oh, okay.
Which is a whole other conversation about how you find one, et cetera, et cetera. We can maybe talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I've been working with a retoucher called Stefka Pavlova for about 9 years now, I guess.
Right.
And she's just been amazing. We've got a really compatible style. She's really good at coming back with images on time. And it just worked out really well. I just think in that case, it's worth employing a professional if you don't have the time, because I don't do this full time. I actually got an IT career that's full time, but this is just part time. So there was no way I could spend 3 or 4 hours on an image after doing a shoot where you need several images from it. So I decided at that point it was best to outsource that side of things.
That kind of feeds into my next question anyway, because I was going to basically ask, one thing I do know about beauty work, with a little bit of sort of perspective from watching other people do it, is how reliant it is on sort of teams rather than just like two individuals, you know, one taking pictures of the other. And how do you go about kind of building up a team? How do you go about finding people with the similar skill set, the similar goals, and the personalities that match? You know, how hard is that to do?
We've been really lucky, really. I've had loads of different teams rather than being just one constant team, I guess. I've kept the same retoucher mainly because I like to show some loyalty to that as well. So although I've had lots of retouchers coming to me saying, can I edit your images and can we make some sort of deal, which is great of them, I'd rather stick with the one that I've had for ages that's, done a great job. So that's what I've tried to do, is stay loyal to her. Teamwork's so important. I mean, especially in hair and beauty, because obviously you've got the stylist, and you've got the fashion styling, you've got the makeup artist. Everybody's part of the team, and without one person in that team doing the job well, you're not going to get the same results. So I always do everything I can to credit the team, and certainly there's very little that's ever been, well, I don't think there's anything, it's just been down to me, because even if you're working with one model and they've done their own makeup, it's a team effort. It's the two of you. So finding a good team is really important.
How much of importance would you place on being able to communicate what you're looking for? I think obviously one of the problems with you all coming from different professions is that you would you would have a different language for describing different things. Obviously the makeup artist knows a lot more technical things about the makeup. So how do you go about sort of communicating what it is that you're looking for? Is it a system of like using mood boards, or do you actually know quite a lot of the lingo on their part?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I've spent so many hours now waiting for makeup to be completed by professionals, and I quite enjoy watching the process. That you do get the lingo, and you do get a feel for what's right and what's wrong, and maybe suggest that something could go in a certain direction. A lot of the things I do are collaborations as well as paid jobs, so it's important that everybody has their own input as well. So I don't like to be too dictatorial. It's nice to get some feedback from everybody that's doing the job, but at some point you have to make a decision. So occasionally you have to step in and say, no, this is the way we're going to go, and everybody's happy from that point on.
When you're planning something like a creative beauty shoot, the planning stage of it, not the shooting stage, but the actual like building up the idea, working out the kinks and whatnot, is that you, or is that a collaborative effort where one of you brings in an idea and you discuss it?
Generally speaking, it's a collaborative effort. I tend to, I like to go into a situation, whether that be, because I don't have a studio, I've never had a studio, I've always worked on location, generally speaking, or in somebody's premise, or in somebody's house even. So you don't really know what it's going to be like when you get there. So when it comes to lighting and things like that, you don't know how high the ceilings are. If you're working in salons, you don't know if it's full of mirrors. There's all sorts of things that can be an issue with space and that kind of stuff. So you have to adapt to the situation. And I think the way I look at photography, although some people have a vision in their mind straight away of what they're trying to achieve, and I admire that isn't really me. I tend to adapt to what's happening at the time. So much of it is on the fly, if I'm honest. Yes, we have mood boards and things like that, but personally, I don't think I've ever seen a shoot end up looking like the mood board, really. It is just a mood.
Yeah, it's just a direction, right? It's not the destination necessarily, but it's just giving you, relatively speaking, the right pathway to walk down to end up maybe towards the idea of what you're looking for.
It is funny how different they can look like sometimes. It's like, what was the mood board for? This is nothing like the result, but we're happy with it.
Something I really don't know, and I'm fascinated by, and you have a little bit of this in your portfolio, is the work with insects. Alive?
Definitely not. No, that was working with a French model that had an insect collection, and she brought it over to the UK and was really keen to shoot it. And they were amazing insects. I mean, nothing like I've ever seen in the UK before. But even though they're dead, it doesn't mean they're easy to work with. I was working with a makeup artist called Gemma on those particular ones, and she was amazing. But the amount of times we dropped them because we're trying to pick them up with tweezers and be really careful and all that kind of stuff, but we had legs falling off and all sorts of things going on. And these were a bit of a prized possession of the model as well, and a few hit the deck and stuff. It was a bit of a disaster from that point of view. But yeah, if they look real, that's great.
So when it comes to the team, if we go down if we talk about like hairstylist, makeup artist and model, if we go for those three, I'm aware that there's more. But what makes the ideal makeup artist, the ideal hairstylist, and quite importantly to you, my opinion of beauty photography is sort of the model selection, the subject selection. So what makes the ideal selection for all three of those?
It is nice to work with people. Well, with people you worked with before, you know how the things are going to go. So that's always a good start. Although having said that, if it is somebody new, generally speaking, I've had no issues at any point where you've clashed or anything like that. You just kind of, gone with what's going on and it's all worked out fine. So I'm quite happy from that point of view. So makeup artists, it's important they know the skills and they've had lots of experience, especially at the sort of level I shoot these days, because you do see the errors if they're there, and the worst things are things like having too much foundation so things look cakey, or not having the right kind of match for the skin and all that kind of stuff. So if you've got someone that knows all that and they're talented, and there's a lot that I've worked with that have been absolutely brilliant, then that's that sorted really. On the hair front, a lot of the things I've done hair-wise have been for competition again. So the hairstylist has actually led that shoot. They've even, they've paid for those kind of shoots. So you're going there and they've sorted all that out. They know exactly what they're going to do. They've planned it out. They've maybe even practiced it beforehand. So again, that's really been directed by their desire rather than mine. I'm really photographing what they've put in front of me. And as I'm shooting, there'll be occasions, because I find that quite a slow process. Although you can make it dynamic and you can add air to the shoot and all that kind of stuff and get things moving about, sometimes with hair, every hair just has to be in its place. So there's tiny movements here and there just to make sure that everything's right. So I'll make suggestions sometimes if I see something doesn't look quite right. You might have a loop in a hair somewhere the stylist haven't seen there from their point of view. And I'll say, do you think, was that what you wanted there, or do you want to move that? And quite often they'll go back and they'll change it, and they're grateful for your point of view, really, that you're seeing something they haven't seen. So, it's very collaborative on that front.
And then the ideal model, what does an ideal model have for you to want to work with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, facial structure is really important. So great jawline, cheekbones, amazing looking eyes, lips. You could talk about everything really, but then that doesn't always have to be your standard attractive looking woman. You can have someone that's quite quirky that really fits the bill. So it's difficult to pick, but it's such an important thing, because to me, sometimes look at my images and I wonder whether all the work that I've put into it and the team's put into it, although people are seeing that and hopefully it's looking good for that reason, I think the main focus is the model. If you've got a great model, it's hard to go too wrong. And maybe the perception of the image by other people, whether that's a good or a bad image, is purely down to who you've shot. That's just a theory of mine. But
okay, so to me, I think that there is basically two kinds of model, essentially, which is this, like you just kind of put it, you have the sort of conventional pretty model, and then the other side I would just refer to as aliens, would be people that are striking in a sense that they have interesting features or they have an interesting structure, that they draw attention, maybe not for the idea of being conventionally attractive, but they are still someone that is incredibly striking. Which would you prefer?
I don't mind either, but then if you have a model that's got the experience to go with it as well, and they've got a range of expressions and they just really know what works, they know their angles, that can make so much difference. A professional model is a huge difference.
One of the things that I've heard quite often said, maybe by people that are either less experienced or completely inexperienced with photography, is that like headshots or beauty work, the modeling is very easy. You just have to sit there and be pretty because you're not moving around too much. And in my experience, especially where I've worked with headshots for quite a while, it's actually one of the hardest things for a subject because it's incredibly close and you're sort of very restricted within your movement because of the setup. And there's a lot of focus on your expression. Is it an underrated skill? Oh,
for sure. Yeah, for sure. There's some models that make it look easy. So you could say maybe they're finding it easy. But there's definitely a talent there to do it right regularly and look amazing. It's not an easy thing to do.
Is there a way that a model could, no matter how sort of either conventionally attractive or just striking in physical appearance, is there something a model could do to kind of sour working with you? Is there a sort of a personality clash that you worry about? Are you someone that gets bothered about like lateness or ego, anything like that? Yeah,
I don't think anybody's keen on that. If you've got a team turn up and they're on time and then the model turns up late, there's all sorts of excuses you've heard before. Some will be valid, some won't. some have to come a long way to a shoot. It might be coming from the Midlands or something to a shoot in London or something like that, and it is difficult to get your timing spot on for that sort of thing. I do understand that, but if you're hours late or something like that and there's not a good reason, then it would depend on the shoot and what it was for.
Yeah,
but I could potentially stop the shoot if it was that delayed. On the basis of that, it really depends what it was for. But like anybody else, I appreciate some respect, and I'll give the same back.
Yeah, I've made the mistake in the past, I think, of exercising a little bit too much professional spite, where I've put aside time and I've maybe sort of stuck my neck out for someone, and then when they've let me down, I blackball them outright, because it frustrates me when I think there are people that give too much and there are people that take too much, and there's very few people in the middle of that. And I think sometimes to say something kind of remotely controversial, I think people that have had an easier time of things in terms of being praised a lot for their looks or having received a lot of compliments for something physical about themselves maybe sometimes think that's all they need to kind of show up. And it makes it so much better when you work with someone that's not only like physically fantastically put together, but also just a professional human being.
Absolutely, 100%. And like you, if it happens once with a good reason, I'd probably let them have a second chance, but you wouldn't get a third if you did it to me again.
No, it's just a waste of everybody's time.
There's too many people out there, too many good people to work with to have to worry about someone that's unreliable.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. With the work that you do edit, I want to go down a little bit of a retouching route here, but with the work that you do edit, what's your sort of ratio in terms of time shooting compared to time editing?
I've got to say, I think I've found over the years that my favourite time is actually during the shoot. That's what I enjoy most. Mm-hmm. I'm not a huge fan of editing, and I think I've got kind of two styles these days. I mean, I do have the studio beauty stuff that goes off to Stefka to get edited and everything looks amazing. And then I've got the side where I'll go on a trip to France and shoot models over there and shoot them with natural light rather than flash. And they don't really need too much edit. So I like to keep it a bit more real when I'm doing that kind of stuff in natural light and not edit so much. But obviously the beauty side is a different story, and that's like poor level retouching, so different altogether. Something
I've found in the times that I've had conversations with people about retouching, especially people that are outside of sort of the photographic sphere, it seems especially more and more since probably about 2015, the conversation moves towards like ethics and body positivity and stuff like that. I have a pretty strong opinion on this myself, but no one cares about my opinion on this podcast. So I want to read a quote to you, and it's kind of like my marriage, this podcast. It's mostly about the other side. So I want to read a quote to you about body image and sort of the ethics of retouching, and just see kind of what you think of this quote. So this is by a designer and a creative director called, I've written the name down with my own handwriting, I can't read it, Sarah Crassley, and said decisions that post-production artists and retouchers are making are causing public health problems. You have young women and men looking at these pictures and thinking their body needs to look like that in order to be accepted.
Okay.
And what do you make of a comment like that?
Well, I've got a teenage daughter, so I'm kind of have a vested interest in not doing anything to upset her. So very few of my images are reshaped or anything like that. And I guess maybe some of that's down to the fact that I'm mainly doing head and shoulders. So I'm not often doing full body stuff anyway. But I'd be very reluctant to reshape somebody. As far as skin edits go, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because if somebody's got a mole on their face and that's them, should you keep it in, shouldn't you? I do struggle with that sometimes, because sometimes it looks better without and sometimes it's better with it in. Some models will say that they prefer it in or out. But not many have already stipulated that to me, so I kind of do what I feel is right at the time. But I think these days you should do as much as you can to keep it real. But then I'm sure there's plenty of models that might have the odd blemish that would be happy if you got rid of it before it went out on the internet.
To me, it's just a really interesting time, because with the amount of people that have some form of face fixing app on their phone, so when they'll take a picture of themselves, they will then do something to change their physical appearance based on what the app is doing. It seems a very bizarre time to suddenly have a problem with photographers doing it when it's something that's so freely chased. And the other side of it to me is that there seems to be an awful lot of people that want to protect other people from stuff that I don't necessarily think people always need to be protected from. I think, we could give people the benefit of the doubt. I think one group in particular, perhaps like your daughter, young women are kind of treated as if they don't understand things. They're not capable of rational thinking. They're not capable of sort of deducting conclusions from something. They're just sort of like vulnerable animals that need to constantly be protected. And it feels kind of counterintuitive to what is essentially a feminist movement for it to be so dismissive of especially young females' ability to kind of rationally think through a situation and make decisions.
Yeah, I agree to a point. And there's certainly a lot of people out there that are trying to make life what they think is easier or better for other people, as opposed to, really having an opinion on themselves as such. It's really, they're trying to do it for somebody else. And it's like you say, it may not be necessary.
Yeah, what I don't want to do is I don't want to push you down a whole political side or anything like that. It's just interesting from a beauty photographer. It's something that I've heard be brought up about cosmetic adverts and obviously fashion photography. Magazine covers is a big sort of buzzword for it. It's just interesting to hear kind of the artist side of things, because we're always just hearing from angry people on Twitter.
Yeah, and it's difficult right now because obviously you're still seeing the magazines that are highly retouched, and then you get the others that have got very minimal. So I think at the moment both styles still appeal out there to some degree to both types of people. But I am starting to go more towards the less retouched stuff than I was before, in general. Unless it's dictated by a brief that, it must be.
Going down the channel of your personal work, because your website's really nicely set out. One of the things I absolutely love about your website is the BTS, but we'll come back to that in a bit. Your personal work, is it a sort of direct reaction to what you're doing with your professional work? Is it kind of the antidote to your professional work?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, I guess it feels like that, but then I think it would be nice to start being looked at for that more. Mm-hmm. If people appreciate that style, that's great, because I really enjoy doing that too. But then that is stuff that's been done and shot abroad, for example. I get a lot of inspiration when I go abroad now. When I'm shooting in Essex, it's not quite the same thing. So, that's probably what I enjoy shooting most at the moment. Whether or not I end up getting booked on that basis, we'll have to see.
So if someone like myself, okay, or maybe not like myself because I've been working in photography for a bit, but if someone wanted to get into beauty photography, say there's someone that's interested in not photographing people, but they're interested by magazine covers or cosmetic adverts or whatever, what is the essential equipment of a beauty photographer?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, these days, I used to be, because I'm in IT as my main role, so I love technology. So I have been up on must have the latest kit, must have the latest gadgets, all that kind of stuff for years and years. But now I find it doesn't really bother me so much, because everything that's coming out seems to be at a level where it's all really good anyway. Yeah. So I'd say pretty much you could start off with any half decent camera and you'd be okay. And then it's down to glass lenses. I've generally found that for close-up beauty, having a macro lens works really well. So a 90mm or a 105 macro for whatever system you have to be running works really nicely. Portrait in general, anything between 70 and 200 works well. I'd say, my go-to lens is probably a 105 macro. So I'd highly recommend getting one of those.
Obviously with macro lenses, there's such a higher degree of sharpness. Do you ever find that that can be detrimental potentially in terms of it kind of producing too much detail for sort of more of the portrait side of things?
I think it's very much dependent on the model, on the model's skin. If they've got a model with great skin, and that can be enhanced in post-production as well, it can just look stunning. So I've got no problem with that at all, with the amount of detail. The amount of detail you get in an iris and all that kind of stuff, if that comes out, that can just look amazing. So, no, not really.
And in terms of lighting, is it good to sort of start off with one light and just figure that out? Do you have any kind of go-to lighting setups that you think you couldn't go without?
I mean, I would say probably 90% of my stuff is shot with one light and a reflector. So something like, obviously you can have different modifiers and stuff. So you could have a big softbox, because this isn't a hard and fast rule. Obviously you can use hard light or soft light depending on what it is that you want to get out of it. But generally most of my stuff is soft light, quite close up with the softbox or the beauty dish, whatever it happens to be we're using. I find having that on a boom stand works really well. So it's nice that I've got a portable boom stand for that. So it's not getting in the way of you taking the images. Sometimes use a tripod, because obviously when you're shooting macro and you're quite close to your subject, you've got a very shallow depth of field. So you have to take that into account. And it does mean sometimes you're shooting at a really small aperture, smaller maybe than your ideal for sharpness. If let's say your ideal is f8, I still may be shooting at f13 plus to get what I want to get in the image in focus, depending on how close I am to the subject. But yeah, those and a reflector for underneath or another light underneath. If you want to do it that way, you can. But very few of my images have more than two lights, unless I'm lighting a background as well or having a hair light in there. One will serve you well for a long time.
Is there a different approach in terms of, from your point of view, not obviously the overall team, but is there a difference in approach when you're doing hair work as opposed to doing beauty photography?
Yeah, because the lighting is a bit more important because you need to show the hair. So if you're lighting for the face, as you would do in beauty, you need to expand that into the hair. So generally speaking, that might involve another light coming in from the top or wherever it may be. I don't often have rim light in my images. You might notice that if you look through again. Mm-hmm. So it tends to be maybe something from the top and something light in the face. I think the thing with hair photography, it's really sometimes you're encouraged to have like a different backdrop that might look, different for the collection of images or something like that. So then you've got to start thinking about how you're going to light that and bring that into the images as well.
Is it the case that you're spending a lot of time in the sort of the testing of the lights and making sure that everything's kind of in the right place, and then it's very few shots to get the shot that you want? Or are you still shooting quite a lot once you've got everything set?
No, to be honest with you, I'm fairly quick. Once things are set up, I might take 10, 15 images and I'll stop then, because usually the last couple will be the ones that are the best. So yeah, it's usually fairly quick once everything's set up. You don't always get as much time to set up as you might like. There's been plenty of times when I could have spent more time trying to get the lighting spot on, but I've had to really go with the flow of, being given the models with their different looks and stuff. So you haven't got much time. But yeah, once it's ready, it doesn't take too long.
Is there anything about working in beauty and hair that maybe people don't realize is harder than it looks? Or is there any kind of myths about being a beauty photographer that people misunderstand?
That's a good question. I think the main thing is if you haven't got a studio and you're going to be going, like I said, to possibly anywhere to shoot, which you may or may not have had a recce of beforehand, you need to adapt to the situation. So you may have to, I tend to shoot between two black panels to sort of help my contrast and stuff, but that also means that I don't get reflections back from white walls and from mirrors on the wall and all that kind of stuff. So you can control it to a point wherever you are, but you still need enough room to be able to do what you've got to do. One of the things that can be a problem that you kind of don't always have the depth of field that you want one way or the other because of the space you're working in. So you've got to kind of just do the best you can, getting the kind of results you're after based on how much space you've got.
So it's obviously, I think, a myth with beauty photography that maybe a myth that you guys kind of, because you work within a studio, and I think the idea is people come to your studio, you take some pictures and they go away, and then that's the end of it. It's a very cozy way of working, where in actual fact, it sounds like it's very much a very quick fire job where you have a lot of moving parts that maybe aren't always in your control. And also that you have to be pretty good at problem solving fairly quickly.
Yeah, if you're not in your own studio and you know it back to front, then definitely, yeah, you have to adapt to wherever you are. And that might be quite easy for beauty. You might just need a sort of clamshell lighting setup. Like I said, reflector underneath, light from the top somewhere, and you may only need 8 foot square to do that in, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, beauty you can probably get away with, especially with macro, because you're getting in nice and close. But if you want to add any depth to your images or make sure that more is in focus based on where you are, it can be a bit more tricky.
Have you ever had clients that have been particularly difficult to work with, where their expectations are either unreasonable or they're constantly changing?
I've done quite well for having not too many problems, to be honest. But I'm sure in the past there's been issues where people want more than you've really initially agreed to. So you may have agreed to 3 or 4 images and suddenly they want 12 or something like that. And if you were editing them yourself, that's a big deal. You know, the amount of time you spend doing that. And even if you're getting it done by a third party, that's extra costs involved. So you really need to cover yourself with a contract, or in fact, preferably with a written contract rather than a verbal one, before you go into something that might cause you issues with the client down the road. Set those expectations right at the beginning and save yourself.
I think contracting up is like the smartest thing anyone can do in photography, is just make sure everyone knows the expectations on both sides.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
To go back to your retoucher for a second, how many years did you say you've been working with them?
So it's got to be about 8 or 9 years now. So I did what most people do when they go and start to find a retoucher, is just send the same image out to several and then see what comes back. And that also meant that they were going out to different countries around the world in some cases. So you had some go to America, South America, India, Europe. And it's very interesting to see what comes back, because some things are also, the result is based on the cultural differences and what appeals to somebody beauty-wise in one of those countries may or may not be what you're looking for. So I found it took me quite a long time, really. So first of all, find someone that I thought was really good at what they did and compatible with what I considered to be my final style. And then you've got to have someone that's reliable. So if you do a job at the weekend, I tend to give them a heads up and say, right, I'm doing this job. We should have 8 images out of this at the end of the day. Do you think you're going to be okay for this next week? And they'll come back to you and say yes or no. Generally speaking, I get my images back within 2 or 3 days.
Wow.
Really fast. So I'm used to that service now. And if I was to send something off to somebody, especially for a client job, and some of these have time constraints, they want the finished images back by a certain date. If you were let down at that stage, that would be a disaster. Because occasionally the client might say, oh, could we have this slightly changed, or whatever. You're going back and forth occasionally. But the other thing that's nice about working with who I work with is there isn't much to and fro, and we know what each other likes now. And generally speaking, it might even come back first time and be perfect. And it's only occasionally on the hair jobs where obviously you've got stylists, the hairdressers looking at these shots from their point of view and what they were trying to achieve, and they might like a slight tweak on something that I wouldn't know, because that's not my profession, you know. Yeah. So I've been lucky that she's been everything. She's reliable. Does everything on time. She's very good at what she does, and she'll also do fixes fast. You can't ask for more than that, really.
Is it important to kind of build up a language between yourselves? Obviously, like you're saying about, you've got people in all different countries where you could potentially send your work. Is it important to kind of build up an understanding of not necessarily, like, I'm not talking kind of literally language, but an understanding of language when you say, oh, I just need this one thing corrected slightly? Obviously, doing that by email could be quite difficult. Is it important to build up that language where you understand each other quite quickly?
Yeah, I generally do most of my communications over Facebook messaging or something like that, to be honest, because you can upload the image, you can annotate an image to show roughly what you want and then try and explain that. And sometimes those descriptions will come from the client direct rather than me even have to step in. I just have to provide the information and hope that the retoucher interprets it correctly. And I've been lucky again in that they have. We do speak slightly with different languages. She speaks some English, but not amazing. So we've managed to get by all these years without too much trouble at all. She's been really good.
When it comes to your team overall, so you've got, like you said, a fashion stylist, hairstylist, makeup artist, yourself, the retoucher, the model, anyone else that might be involved. One of the things I think is really a bad impression people have of beauty photography is that essentially so much stuff can just be sorted in the edit. How important are those people in the pre-production and on the shoot? How important are they, and the little jobs that they do that maybe are completely underappreciated and completely unrecognized by people that are out of the loop in terms of getting things right so that the edit is about improving the image, not saving it?
Yeah, no, totally. Well, I always try and get the lighting as good as I can in camera. So that's a major part of it. The makeup needs to be on point too, because although a retouch can work miracles with most things, if it's pretty much there to start with, that's always a bonus. Having the model turn up after having a decent sleep rather than being up till 4 a.m. is always a good thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think everybody definitely, as a stylist, they're going out maybe the week before trying to gather items from wherever they gather them from, trying to put things together. And then, of course, after the shoot, they've got to take it all back again. So, there's a lot of work goes in behind the scenes. You don't realise that, things don't just turn up. They have to be taken back to where they've gone to. The makeup artist has to get their designs in their mind before they start quite often. The hairstylist certainly does. There's lots of prep. And just like in photography, there's lots of post. And lots of sending images around to people to, be approved or all that kind of stuff, all the admin that goes around it as well. There's a lot goes on behind the scenes.
And to flip the things very slightly, so as a photographer, obviously you produce fantastic images, but what else can you do to ensure that you're on the right side, you're on good terms with everyone in your team? What can a photographer do beyond just producing good work to stay on good terms?
It's an interesting one because I think in my main job, in my IT job, you don't get praised often for what you do. You only get shouted at if things break. Whereas when you're a photographer, if things are going well, everybody's really full of praise and everybody's thanking each other, and the model's getting her compliments and stuff the whole time. You're kind of getting instant gratification to some degree, which you don't really get in many other jobs. So from that point of view, it's totally different. And I think provided everybody's having a good time, that they're being fed, there's no cattiness going on in one way or another. If you can try and avoid all of that stuff, then you're fine.
So you said earlier that you sort of do between 10 and 15 images when the ball gets rolling on beauty work. Something I found from working with models is that quite a few of them have needed a good flow. They've needed to kind of get into the rhythm of what they're doing to really start producing the good stuff. So how do you go about balancing kind of your efficiency with making sure someone's kind of warmed up enough? And how do you go about sort of tempering that point where you're sort of taking excessive images or not enough images? How did you go about finding that happy medium?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, that's really just going with the flow, I find, because when the model first turns up, maybe the first time you've met them, it can take a little while to, as you say, get in the flow. So you may find, it depends what it's for. If it's for a model portfolio or something, you might find the first one or two looks are kind of just, the shots are pretty average. And it's not till nearly the end of the shoot that you're getting the best work out of them. But that really is just about confidence of the person you're shooting at the time, their experience, the rapport between you. there's all sorts of things that can affect that, but I don't think you can really control. Well, I certainly can't control that. And if somebody said, right, I've got to have 15 different looks out of this or whatever it may be, to guarantee that they're going to have an amazing look out of each one, because as you say, I think that the whole path of the day tends to improve as you go along.
One of the things I love about one of the things I absolutely love about your work, especially your hair work, is the energy of it. It feels like there's a real, I don't know if this is the right word, but it definitely feels like there's an aggression to the energy. It feels like it's got a lot of attitude. It's got a lot of fire in it. And obviously with all the incremental changes that are being done between the lighting and the hairstylist making sure that everything's exactly where they want it to be, and the fact that, like you say, you're working usually within a sort of a limited time period. How do you go about keeping that energy up?
I wouldn't say I was the most outgoing photographer that kind of, really G's everybody up and all that kind of stuff. I kind of stick to my role, and I enjoy a rapport with the models, but not overly. Sort of trying to do that, if you know what I mean. A lot of it is down to the models that are picked for those jobs. If they can give you that fierceness or whatever it is you're looking for, that's the important thing. And although I'm sure there's photographers out there that can bring that out of people, I'm not an extrovert from that point of view. I don't think it's me that's really putting that out of them. All I'm really doing is tweaking angles when I'm talking to my models more than anything else.
Right.
Chin up here, chin down there. Can you look a little this way, that way? Make sure your eyes aren't looking too far over, etc., etc. And that's the kind of things I'll be talking, but obviously giving them compliments on how things are going and all that kind of stuff as you go along. But that's pretty much how I work. I don't really sort of go further than that from my point of view.
Something that I've asked on quite a few of these podcasts, whenever I get someone that photographs people, and I almost never get a even remotely complete answer, is in terms of people you'd like to photograph.
Okay.
So do you have like a list of 5 people perhaps that you'd really love to have the opportunity to photograph, whether it be beneficial to your career or just the fact that their faces would suit your work or they suit your style, anything like that?
I think you just got to say that anybody that's famous would be fantastic to be able to shoot them. I mean, one of my biggest influences is probably Peter Lindbergh. I mean, I absolutely love his work. And when you see what he's done with some of the A-list celebrities, but he's also kept it real. I'm not done anything too overboard in most of his situations. Mm-hmm. That's really how I'd like to be. So I don't know if I'd actually pick anybody in particular. Charlize Theron, maybe.
Yeah.
But somebody that's got lots of character, has got a backlog of amazing images, to be able to walk away with something similar would be absolutely amazing. So, that's all I could say, really. I think it's just somebody famous would be fantastic.
And we kind of circling back earlier, I spoke about if someone was interested in becoming a beauty photographer, what would they need in terms of gear? But if you were to advise someone that's looking to get on the path, what's the best piece of advice, given sort of where you are on the ladder, you could give to someone that's looking to get onto the ladder?
It's interesting because I think in photography, you need to be better at marketing than you are anything else, probably. And I've never really done that. I've never really marketed myself particularly. I've done the social media and that kind of stuff to a degree, but again, not overly. Because I've got a full-time job, I can't do shoots during the week, generally speaking, unless I take time off work. And I have done that in the past, but, you can't run a business like that. So you really need to know who to speak to. You need to network and make sure that you're at the forefront of anybody that could possibly book you's mind. So if you are going to fashion shows and things like that, and you're talking to designers, and you maybe, if you get into the hair photography thing, you're talking to hairdressers and showing them what you can do and all that kind of stuff, then maybe you stand a chance of getting some work with them. But again, a lot of these people are quite loyal to people they worked with before, and certainly in the hair photography industry, there's 4 or 5 big names that seem to get a lot of the work, and they get it regularly from those same customers. So breaking into where somebody's already taken a hold is very hard.
Is that the downside of it being so team intensive?
I don't know that team intensity is is the downside. I think it's just that there's a certain amount of work out there that everybody's chasing, but you're also you'd have to drag someone away from someone they really like already to probably get some of the jobs, and that's even harder. And of course, I appreciate loyalty, and I'm sure everybody else does. So yeah, it's a difficult thing.
So if we take Peter Lindbergh out of the equation really quickly, I'm a huge fan of Peter Lindbergh. I think one of the most, of all the sort of fascination we've had over the past few years with celebrity deaths, which has been very bizarre. I think his one went under the radar for everyone outside of the photographic community when it really shouldn't have.
No, it shouldn't have.
Who else are your influences in your work, and whose work do you enjoy looking at that kind of keeps your mind active with inspiration?
Vincent Peters is another one. And it's interesting that both him and Peter do a lot of black and white work, and I really love working with black and white. So maybe that's why I really love those two. Herb Ritz, Russell James, fashion photographer, Rankin, I love his work as well. There's a lot. There's a lot of people that I really, really enjoy, but certainly I'd say Peter's my number one right now.
It's a very sad thing, I think, with photography is a lot of people that are starting out, they take a long time to realize the importance of acquiring a taste and actually learning what you like and why you like it and analyzing your own opinions a little bit. I think that helps you move forward quite quickly with getting through what technical knowledge you need and what technical knowledge you don't need. Whereas a lot of people that come into photography, I mean, I spent the better part of the last 9 months on a bit of a social experiment of joining a camera club and kind of seeing how that works. And it's amazing the amount of people that are just led by technical aspects rather than what interests them, what kind of lights a fire in them.
Yeah, I've never got on with camera clubs. It's never appealed to me. I've tried it a couple of times and it's been an eye-opener.
Based on my experience and the experience my mum went through and anyone else I've spoken to about it, I think it's the same 25 people that have been in camera clubs for the last 200 years and no one else joins and likes it. It's just a load of people that get together and no one else can ever kind of penetrate the system or the way of thinking or the clickiness of it. And it's just never really going to move forward.
Yeah.
And it'll probably end up dying out because of it.
It does seem to be the older generation. They don't seem to be overly keen on having the younger generation join in. Because I went with a friend. I mean, I'm in my 50s, so I can't really say I'm young, but I was younger than they were because they were kind of 70s, 80s, I think, generally speaking. And one of the first nights we went to, I'd obviously decided to have a competition the week before, and it was photographing doors or windows, apparently. So they started showing slides or whatever it was of some of the shots they'd done. And I was looking at my friend thinking, oh dear, this isn't particularly exciting. And there was actually almost like a fight broke out in the room where somebody was saying, I thought this was doors or windows, not doors and windows, because some people had both in their image and they had this big kind of situation over what it was. And that kind of really put me off. I think that they also said at the time that next week there's going to be a competition on something or other. And I said, oh, can we join in for that? Oh, no, you can't join unless you're a member. So you had to commit to being a member before you'd even be, let into the fold whatsoever.
Well, I joined fully. I thought, in for a penny, in for a pound. I went to the local one just after I moved, joined. I've entered some competitions. One of my images was a headshot of an actor, and the judge spent about 5 minutes essentially calling me gay for the image that I was obviously just obsessed with the look of the man. I wasn't interested photographically, which was really bizarre. There was no feedback coming from it. But one of the funniest moments, so I'm 31 and I definitely don't feel young, but in there I feel like practically a baby. And there was a presentation where they were talking about basically how stupid millennials were and people that take pictures on their phones. And this is going to be a lost generation because no one is using a camera anymore other than on their phone. And there was a little line of dialogue or monologue in this presentation which really stuck out to me, which was, they said, I'm sure everybody in this room knows where they were when the moon landing happened. And I was about 19 years off being born.
Yes.
Okay, so one thing I want to obviously make sure that everybody gets to do, the whole point of me doing these podcasts is to just introduce people to amazing photographers, hear from amazing photographers, and then hopefully from there build up their repertoire of amazing people to follow. How do we follow you? What is your website, your social media? How do we follow you?
Okay, so website is martinhiggs.co.uk, nice and easy. Instagram is at mhiggs2000. And that's the main ones, really. I'm on Facebook too, but I tend to use that a bit less these days. So it's Instagram and my website, probably the best places to get hold of me.
And one more question before we let you go and enjoy your evening. What are you doing to kind of keep yourself active mentally and inspired during this sort of lockdown period?
Oh, it's very depressing. I had 2 foreign trips planned, one to France, one to Spain, later in the year, and so June and October, and it's now looking like probably neither of those will happen. So we're going to probably have to postpone those to the following year, all being well. I really enjoy those trips. I go with a group of photographer friends, and the photography is really good. We tend to be one-to-one with 4 models for the whole period you're out there, so you get loads of images. And then in the evenings, you chill out and, have a meal together and drink wine and chat about what you've done during the day. And I really enjoy it. And that's all gone out the window this time around. So, yeah, not great. I had a shoot for the British Hairdressing Awards booked, and that's been cancelled. So that's a shame. I was supposed to be doing another shoot for another brand, and that's, again, can't be arranged because of getting everybody together. So at the moment, it's difficult to be inspired, if I'm honest. Everything seems to be just going to pot.
I think it's the uncertainty more than anything, right? It's just sitting there and not really knowing when you can start to feel things are going to return to normal. So it's hard to kind of gear yourself up.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they seem to be saying that nothing will return to normal until they found a vaccine, and you've got some sort of certificate saying that you've been tested and everything's fine. So if that's the case, that could be a year, 18 months away, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe crazy longer. Times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Like I say, your work is absolutely phenomenal. You're one of my favorite photographers. You've been so gracious as to come on this. Thank you so much. And please, please, please keep producing amazing work.
Oh, thank you very much. I'd like to think I remain humble, and I appreciate anybody that likes the work. It's fantastic. Thank you very much.